She put divorce papers on the table and called it a joke. I picked up the pen and signed every page. She thought I'd beg. She thought wrong. What she didn't know was that I already knew about the hidden phone, the secret account, and a man she trusted more than her own husband. My name is Nash Kemper. I'm 43 years old, and I've spent the last 16 years of my life working oil and gas fields across Texas, Wyoming, and the Gulf Coast. Senior technical specialist, which sounds impressive until you understand what it actually means. You're the guy they call at 2 in the morning when a pressure valve fails in the middle of nowhere, and you drive 4 hours in the dark to fix it, because that's your job, and you take your job seriously. Same way I took my marriage seriously. I met Lydia at a 4th of July cookout at a mutual friend's place in Midland. She was 24, laughing at something across the yard, wearing a yellow sundress, and not caring who noticed her. I noticed. We dated for 2 years and got married in September, 11 years ago. No kids. We talked about it, agreed to wait, then kept waiting until waiting just became the way things were. For the first few years, we were good. Really good. I was gone a lot, sure, the job demands it. But when I was home, I was present. I cooked, I fixed things, I showed up to her work events in a clean shirt, and made conversation with people I didn't particularly like. I thought that was enough. I thought being steady and dependable was the foundation a marriage needed. What I didn't realize was that Lydia had a different definition of enough. The shift was gradual, subtle in the way slow leaks are subtle. You don't notice until the damage is already done. She started working later, started having more after-work drinks with colleagues, started talking about a guy from the pharmaceutical company that supplied her clinic, Zach Pelton, with a casual frequency that, in hindsight, should have raised every flag I owned. But I was tired a lot. I was on a long-haul rotation up in Wyoming for most of that spring, and when I'd come home every 2 weeks, the house felt slightly different each time. Not in any way I could point to, just a degree or two off from what it used to be, like a compass that's close but not quite north. The Tuesday it all came apart started like any other. I'd been home for 3 days after a 2-week stint in the Permian Basin. Lydia made pasta for dinner, the good kind, with the sauce she'd been making since we were dating. We ate. We talked about small things. She asked about a noise the dishwasher had been making. I said I'd look at it. Normal. Ordinary. Then she cleared the plates, reached into the kitchen drawer where we kept takeout menus and loose batteries, and pulled out a manila envelope. She set it on the table between us with both hands, like she was presenting a contract at a business meeting. I need you to look at something, Lydia said, keeping her voice measured. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and pulled the envelope toward me. Inside was a neat stack of papers, printed and formatted with professional precision. Legal header at the top. Our full names. The word dissolution in clean, official type. Divorce papers. Fully completed. Her signature already on the last page in that looping, confident handwriting I'd watched sign Christmas cards for a decade. I looked up at her slowly. She tilted her head with a half smile, the kind you give when you're waiting for the punchline to land. It's just a joke, Nash. Relax. I found a template online and thought it would be funny. You've been so serious lately. I figured it'd shake things up. I looked back down at the papers. Read through the first page. The second. Every field filled in. Assets itemized. The house. My 401k. Her car. Even the dog, Ranger, listed under her proposed custody. This wasn't a template someone threw together for a laugh. This was work. Careful, deliberate work. I stood up, walked to the counter, and picked up the pen we kept by the notepad next to the phone. I walked back to the table, sat down, and started reading from the top again, slowly, page by page, and signed every single line that had a marker tab on it. Lydia watched me, with the smile still on her face. Then the smile began to fade. By the third page, it was gone entirely. Nash. Her voice shifted. Nash, stop. I was joking. I didn't look up. I turned to the next page. Nash. Her chair scraped back. She reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her voice shot up, sharp enough to cut through the quiet house. Stop. I'm serious, Nash. Stop right now. I didn't mean for you to actually. I lifted my eyes to hers then, calm and level, and held her gaze for a long moment. You spend time filling these out, I said quietly. Every field, every line. You put Ranger on here, Lydia. She let go of my wrist. I signed the last page, capped the pen, and slid the folder back across the table toward her. If it was a joke, I said, standing up, then it cost you nothing. But if it wasn't, I paused at the kitchen doorway and looked back at her. Then you just got exactly what you were building toward. I went upstairs. I didn't sleep much that night, but I slept better than I had in months. I was already up when the sun came through the blinds. Hadn't really slept, more like floated in and out of something that resembled it. Ranger was curled at the foot of the bed, chin on my ankle, which he only did when something fell off in the house. Dogs no. I could hear Lydia downstairs. Cabinets opening. The coffee maker running. The particular sound of someone moving through a space with too much energy for the hour. Drawers pulled too fast. Feet hitting the tile too hard. She was working something out. I let her work. I took a shower, got dressed, and came down at 7:15. She was at the kitchen island with the folder open in front of her, papers spread out like she was auditing them. She'd been crying. I could tell by the slight swelling under her eyes. But she'd also fixed her hair and put on a clean shirt. Lydia never let herself look undone for long. Appearances mattered to her. They always had. She looked up when I walked in. I poured myself coffee without saying anything and sat across from her at the table. "You're not seriously going through with this," she said, her voice carrying that careful, controlled tone she used when she was managing a situation. I took a sip and set the mug down. "You prepare those papers, Lydia. That wasn't a template you grabbed off Google. Someone helped you with that." Her jaw tightened. "I told you, it was a joke. A stupid impulse. I wasn't thinking." Every field filled in. I replied evenly. The house valued correctly. My 401k balance, which you would have had to look up, listed to the dollar. Ranger under your proposed custody. I paused. That's not an impulse. That's research. She pushed away from the counter and crossed her arms. "So what? You're going to blow up our marriage over a bad joke?" I looked at her steadily. "I didn't blow anything up. You handed me a lit match and called it a party trick." That landed. I saw in the way her shoulders dropped slightly, the way she glanced toward the window instead of back at me. She was regrouping. "I've been unhappy, Nash." Her voice shifted, softer now, the strategy adjusting in real time. "That's what I was trying to say. Not with a lawyer. Not with papers. I just needed you to see that things aren't okay between us." "Then say that," I answered. "Say, Nash, I'm unhappy. I need us to talk. Don't hand me a legally prepared dissolution agreement and call it a wake-up call." She didn't respond to that directly. Instead, she said, "So you just signed them. Just like that. 13 years, and you just pick up a pen." I stood up, rinsed my mug in the sink, and turned back to face her. "You signed them first. You signed them before you even put them on the table. I just followed your lead." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight to it. She sat down slowly on the bar stool, both hands flat on the counter, staring at the papers. I watched her and thought about all the times I'd come home from a 2-week rotation and felt that subtle wrongness in the house and said nothing. All the times I'd noticed she'd been distant and assumed it was stress from work. The time she'd mentioned Zach Pelton from the pharmaceutical company with just a little too much casual ease. I'd filed those things away. Told myself I was being reasonable. What I'd actually been was avoidant. "I want to know something," I said quietly, "and I want a straight answer." She looked up. "How long have you been talking to a lawyer?" The pause before she answered was a fraction too long. "I'm not. I haven't been talking to a lawyer." I nodded slowly. "Okay, then I'll ask differently." I moved to the doorway of the kitchen and stopped. "Did you put those papers together yourself? Or did someone help you?" Her eyes dropped back to the folder. "A friend helped me find the forms." "A friend," I repeated. "Yes." I didn't push further. Not then. But I filed that answer away with everything else. Because in 16 years of marriage, Lydia had exactly 2 people she'd call for something like that. Her sister Dana, who would have called me immediately, horrified, or someone she trusted more than her own family. And I already had a name in mind. "I'm going to work," I said from the doorway. "Why get back tonight? I'd like you to tell me who helped you." Not because I'm angry. Because I think we both know this conversation isn't really about a joke. I grabbed my jacket off the hook, called Ranger, and walked out to my truck. The drive to the site was 40 minutes. I spent most of it with the radio off, running the math on things I should have added up a long time ago. I found on a Thursday evening, 3 days after the papers. Lydia had gone to pick up dinner. Her idea, an olive branch of sorts, the kind she extended when she wanted to reset without actually addressing anything. I'd been in the bedroom, changing out of my work clothes when I noticed her closet door was slightly open. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was a shoebox on the upper shelf sitting in an angle, one corner hanging off the edge like someone had pulled it out in a hurry and pushed it back without looking. I'm not a man who goes through his wife's things. Never have been. But I stood there for a moment, and I thought about the papers. The research. The 401k balance listed to the dollar. The lawyer she'd used, but wouldn't name. I pulled down a box. Inside, wrapped in a folded gym sock, was a phone. Cheap prepaid model. Dark screen. I pressed the power button, and it lit up, still charged. No passcode. Either she'd gotten careless, or she never expected me to find it. I sat on the edge of the bed and scrolled. The contact was saved simply as Z. Hundreds of messages going back 22 months. I didn't read every one. I read enough. Enough to understand the timeline. Enough to understand the vocabulary they'd built together. The private language couples developed, the shorthand that meant nothing to an outsider and everything to the two people who made it. Enough to find a message from 4 months ago where she told him she'd been to see someone about the paperwork situation and that things were moving in the right direction. And enough to find the one from 8 days before the dinner table, where she wrote, "I put them together. I'm going to show him this week. If he reacts the way I think he will, it gives me everything I need." I set the phone down on my knee and sat there in the quiet of the bedroom for a long time. She hadn't handed me those papers as a joke. She hadn't handed them to me as a wake-up call. She'd handed them to me as a trap. If I'd gotten angry, raised my voice, acted out, she'd have had grounds to paint me as unstable in the proceedings. If I'd begged her to stay, she'd have known she had the upper hand. Either way, she won. What she hadn't planned for was the pen. I heard the garage door open at 7:40. I put the phone back in a box, put the box back on the shelf at the same crooked angle I'd found it, and went downstairs. We ate dinner at the kitchen table. She talked about something that happened at the clinic. I listened, asked a question or two, and said nothing about the phone. Ranger sat under my chair and leaned against my leg the whole meal. After she went upstairs, I called my buddy Todd. Todd Garner and I had been friends since high school, the kind of friend who tells you things you don't want to hear and doesn't apologize for it. He picked up on the second ring. "You got a minute?" I asked. "Always," he replied. "What's going on?" I told him about the papers, about the phone, about the 22 months of messages, and the note about the paperwork situation moving in the right direction. There was a long pause on his end. "Nash." His voice was careful. "I have to tell you something, and I should have told you sooner, so I'm sorry for that up front." I waited. "About 5 months ago, you were up in Wyoming. I ran into Lydia and Zach Pelton at Hannigan's. They were at the bar. Close." He paused again. "Not just colleagues, close." I didn't know what to do with it. I told myself maybe I was reading it wrong. I kept waiting for a better time. I looked at the ceiling. "How long did you know?" "That was the only time I saw them together," Todd said. "But I had a feeling before that. The way she talked about him at the Hendersons' cookout last summer. I should have said something then." "I'm sorry, brother." I exhaled slowly. "I'm not going to pretend that doesn't sting. But I'm not angry at you. You should be a little." "Maybe," I admitted. "We'll talk about that in person. Right now I need a good family attorney. You still know that guy in Odessa?" "Dave Pratt." "Yeah. I'll text you his number tonight." "Appreciate it." I sat in the dark kitchen for another hour after that, thinking about what Lydia had written. If he reacts the way I think he will. She'd built her whole plan on a version of me she thought she knew. The patient one, the one who absorbed things quietly and moved on. She'd miscalculated. And now I had the proof in a shoebox. Dave Pratt turned out to be exactly what Todd promised. Sharp, direct, and not interested in wasting my time or his. I met him at his office in Odessa on a Friday morning. Laid out everything. The papers, the phone, the timeline, the hidden account I'd started to suspect existed after I noticed a recurring transfer in our joint bank statement I couldn't match to any bill. Dave listened without interrupting, made notes in a yellow legal pad, and when I finished he set down his pen and looked at me evenly. "The prepaid phone is useful context," he said, "but what's going to matter most in proceedings is the financial picture. You said there's a transfer you can't account for. Monthly. Started about 14 months ago. Small enough not to trigger anything. 300, sometimes 4. Always on the 15th. Dave nodded slowly. "That's a pattern. We'll need your bank records going back at least 18 months. If she's been building a separate account, we'll find it." I left his office with a list of documents to pull together and a clearer head than I'd had all week. The work of it helped, having a task, a direction. I was better with problems I could take apart piece by piece. That evening I came home to find Lydia in the living room with her laptop open and her phone face down on the cushion beside her, which she flipped over the moment I walked through the door. Old habit. Telling. I sat in the chair across from her. "I want to finish the conversation we started Monday morning." She closed the laptop. "What conversation?" "The one where I asked who helped you put those papers together." She met my eyes. "I told you. A friend." "A friend," I said. "Okay. Dana." "No." "Then who?" She looked away. "It doesn't matter." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. It matters to me. Because if you went to a mutual friend, someone I also trust, that changes things. And if you went to Zach Pelton, that changes things differently. The name hit like a stone dropping into still water. She didn't flinch visibly, but her right hand moved to her phone and then stopped itself. Why would I go to Zach for something like that? Her voice stayed even, but her eyes had gone careful. That's not a denial, I replied. She stood up and crossed the window, arms folded, back to me. You've already decided what you think is happening, Nash. Nothing I say is going to change that. Try a straight answer, I said quietly. Just once. I've been in this marriage for 11 years. I've earned that much. She turned around then, and something in her face shifted. Not guilt exactly, more like exhaustion. Like she was tired of maintaining the architecture of the story she'd been telling. I talked to someone who knew the process, she admitted finally. Someone I trusted. That's all I'm going to say. It was the closest thing to a confession I was going to get that night. I stood up. I've contacted an attorney. His name is Dave Pratt. You'll want to find representation. Her eyes widened slightly. You already went to a lawyer? You already went to a lawyer, I replied. I just caught up. I took Ranger for a long walk after that. The night was clear and cold, stars out over the flat West Texas horizon, the kind of sky that makes problems feel appropriately small. I thought about 11 years. The main trip, the cookouts and the road trips and the long stretches when the marriage had felt like a genuine thing. It hadn't all been performance. Some of it had been real. But the phone in the shoebox was real too. And you can't unknow what you know. Dave Pratt moved fast once I handed him the bank records. The transfers, 14 months of them, averaging $340 each, traced back to a savings account at a credit union in Midland that held Lydia's name only. Opened 16 months ago, 2 months before the transfer started. The balance when Dave's forensic accountant pulled the records, just over $6,200. Not a fortune, but enough to tell a story about intention. Dave called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was on site reviewing a pressure report. I stepped away from the crew and took the call leaning against my truck. We've got it documented, he said. The account, the deposit history, the timing. She opened it 2 months after her first contact with a family law firm in Midland, which we also confirmed through public filing records. She was planning this exit for a long time, Nash. I watched one of my guys torque a connection fitting on the far side of the equipment pad. Steady hands, focused work. I envied the simplicity of it right then. What does that mean for the proceedings? I asked. It means her position weakens considerably, Dave replied. Undisclosed marital assets cut against her proposed division, combined with the prepared documents she brought to you, which demonstrates premeditation. Her attorney is going to have a harder time painting her as the aggrieved party. We appeared in court 3 weeks later for the initial hearing. Lydia was there with her attorney, a woman named Celeste Vaughn who had the polished, unhurried confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. Lydia herself was dressed conservatively, navy suit, minimal jewelry, and she wouldn't look at me when we sat down on opposite sides of the room. The hearing was procedural. Filings confirmed, timelines established, temporary orders regarding the house, and shared accounts put in place. I sat with my hands flat on the table and listened to my marriage being reduced to a sequence of legal steps. It wasn't painful the way I'd expected. It was more like watching a building get deconstructed, methodical, piece by piece, nothing dramatic. Until Celeste Vaughn raised the issue of spousal support. Given the income disparity between the parties and Mrs. Kemper's current earning capacity, she said smoothly, we're requesting temporary support during the pendency of proceedings. I felt the muscles in my jaw tighten. Lydia earned good money as a clinic office manager. Not what I made, but solid. She wasn't struggling. She was asking for support not out of need, but out of strategy. Dave handled it calmly, noting the hidden account and the premeditated nature of the filing. The judge, a methodical man named Hollister who gave nothing away, ordered a financial disclosure from both parties before ruling on support. It wasn't a win, but it wasn't a loss. Walking out of the courthouse into the hard West Texas sun, I felt the familiar weight of things being out of my hands. I didn't like that feeling. I'd spent my career being the man who controlled the outcome through preparation and precision. Here I was dependent on a process that moved on its own schedule. Lydia caught up to me in the parking lot. Her attorney was still inside. She walked alongside me for a few steps before speaking. You didn't have to go this hard, she said quietly. I stopped walking and turned to face her. You opened a secret account 16 months ago, Lydia. You consulted a lawyer before you ever said one word to me about being unhappy. You prepared legal documents and called them a joke. I paused. I didn't go hard. I went honest. Her expression tightened. I was protecting myself. From what? I asked. From me? Name one time in 11 years I gave you a reason to protect yourself from me. She looked away. The parking lot was quiet except for the wind pushing a paper cup along the asphalt. I know about the account, I said. I know the timeline. And I know you weren't alone in building your exit plan. I put on my sunglasses and picked up my keys. Get a fair attorney, Lydia, because what you've got now is going to cost you more than you planned for. I drove back to the site. I had a job to do, and unlike some things in my life lately, that was something I still knew how to finish. The post showed up on a Thursday night. I saw it because Todd sent me a screenshot with a message that just said, "Heads up." Lydia had posted on her social media, not Facebook, her Instagram, which she used more for professional networking than personal stuff. The photo was a close-up of a coffee cup on a windowsill, morning light, very curated. The caption was 3 paragraphs long. She wrote about years of feeling invisible, about finally choosing herself, about the courage it takes to walk away from something that stopped feeding your soul. She didn't name me. She didn't have to. Anyone who knew us knew exactly what she was describing. And she had 400 followers, including people we'd worked alongside, attended cookouts with, sat next to at mutual friends' dinner tables. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter and stood there for a moment. The anger was there. I won't pretend it wasn't. But underneath, it was something colder and more clarifying. The recognition that she was managing the narrative again, building the public version of the story before anyone could ask questions. Getting her version out first so mine would look like a rebuttal. I didn't respond. Not publicly. I wasn't going to give that post the dignity of a reaction. What I did instead was call my father. Doug Kemper answered on the second ring. 69 years old, retired pipe fitter, a man who communicated in short sentences and long silences and meant every word of both. I hadn't told him much, just that Lydia and I were separating. I hadn't wanted to get into the specifics until things were clearer. That night, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which was his way. When I finished, there was a pause, and then he said, "She handed you the papers herself." "She did," I confirmed. Another pause. "And you signed them. Every page." I could hear him breathing on the other end. Then, "Good. You didn't beg?" "No, sir." "Good," he said again, and the word carried about a decade's worth of approval in it. "Your grandfather always said, when a woman shows you who she is, believe her the first time." Sounds like she showed you. "Yeah," I said. "She did." "You need money?" "No, I'm fine." "You need me to drive down?" I looked around the kitchen. Ranger was at the back door, nose pressed to the glass, watching something move in the yard. The house was quiet in the way it had become. Not empty, just mine. "Not yet, but I might take you up on that in a few weeks." "Whenever you're ready," Doug said. "I'm not going anywhere." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing in particular. A pipe repair he'd done on his neighbor's irrigation, a college football game he'd watched. Normal things. The kind of conversation that reminded me there was a world outside the proceedings and the paperwork and the post about souls and courage. After he hung up, I went outside and sat on the back steps with Ranger pressed against my knee. The sky over West Texas was enormous and dark and full of stars that didn't care about any of this. I appreciated that about stars. By the following Monday, 3 people from our shared social circle had texted me, carefully, obliquely, to let me know they'd seen the post and wanted me to know they weren't taking sides. The subtext was clear. They'd seen through the performance. That mattered more than I expected it to. One of them was a guy named Phil from our neighborhood who'd known us both for 5 years. His text said simply, "Saw what she put up." That kind of post always says more about the person writing it than they realize. "You good?" I texted back, getting there. And for the first time in weeks, I actually meant it. Doug Kemper drove down from Amarillo on a Friday afternoon 3 weeks after the courthouse hearing, showing up unannounced the way he always did. No warning text, no estimated arrival, just the sound of his old F-250 pulling into the driveway at 4:15 while I was in the garage reorganizing the tool wall. He climbed out slowly, His right knee had been giving him trouble since a fall on a job site 6 years back, and stood looking at the house for a moment before he looked at me. "You lose weight?" he asked. "Few pounds maybe." He nodded like that confirmed something. "You eating real food, or just whatever's in the fridge?" "Both, depending on the week." He grunted and reached into the truck bed for a canvas bag. "Brought a pot, roaster and Carol made. You still have that Dutch oven I gave you?" "Bottom cabinet, left of the stove." We went inside. He put the roast in the oven, found the Dutch oven without asking, and set the temperature like he'd done 100 times in my kitchen, which he had, before everything changed. I sat at the table and watched him move around the space with the unhurried efficiency of a man who'd spent his whole life doing physical work and never saw the point of rushing through anything. Ranger followed him everywhere from the moment he walked in. Dogs no. We didn't talk about Lydia until after dinner. Doug ate with purpose, complimented Carol's recipe once, and waited until I'd cleared the plates before he folded his hands on the table and looked at me directly. "Tell me where it stands," he said. I walked him through it all. The hidden account, the court hearing, the support request, Celeste Vaughn's strategy, and what Dave Pratt had told me 2 days earlier. That the final proceedings were likely 3 to 4 months out, and that my position was solid but not bulletproof. Doug listened without expression. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You mentioned a while back you've been wanting to do that trip," he said finally. "The around-the-world thing." I hadn't expected that turn. I've thought about it more lately. "You should go," he said, flat and certain. "Not running. Going. There's a difference." He picked up his coffee mug. "The proceedings will move on their own schedule whether you're in Midland or in Japan. Dave can handle the filings. You've got your laptop and your phone. The site crews don't need you standing over them every day. You train them right." He set the mug down. "Go see something you haven't seen. You spent 11 years staying put for a woman who was building an exit. Go do the thing. She was the reason you didn't." I sat with that for a long moment. He wasn't wrong. The round-the-world trip had been on my radar since my early 30s. Southeast Asia, Portugal, New Zealand, the Norwegian coast. Every time I brought it up, Lydia had found a reason it wasn't the right time. The clinic needed her. We had commitments. Maybe next year. Next year became the year after, then the year after that, until I stopped bringing it up and filed the idea away somewhere under things that weren't going to happen. The thing she'd been was the reason. Now she wasn't there to be a reason anymore. "I'll think about it seriously," I told him. "Think fast," he said. "You're 43, not 73. Do it while your knees still work." He stayed the weekend. Saturday, we worked on the back fence, which had 2 posts that had been leaning since spring. We worked side by side in the cool November air, driving new posts, tamping gravel, not saying much. The kind of shared labor that communicates more than conversation. By Sunday afternoon, the fence was straight, the garage was cleaner than it had been in 2 years, and I felt, measurably, concretely, less like a man whose life was in pieces and more like a man dealing with a specific problem. That Sunday night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and spent 2 hours looking at round-the-world routing options. Tokyo, then Lisbon, then Cape Town, then Auckland, then back through Southeast Asia. I bookmarked 6 pages and closed the laptop. Not yet, but soon. The following Thursday, I got a call from Dana, Lydia's sister. "I've been wondering when that was coming. I need to tell you something," she said, without preamble. Her voice was tighter than usual. "And I owe you an apology with it." I leaned back in my chair. "Go ahead." "About 8 months ago, Lydia called me upset about something. I don't even remember what it was, some argument you two had about the rotation schedule." I let her vent. She talked about how disconnected things felt, how she felt like she was last on your list. And then she mentioned Zach. I didn't know they were anything more than co-workers. Nash, I genuinely didn't. And she said he understood what she was going through. Dana paused. I told her it was good. She had someone to talk to. I said sometimes it helps to have a person outside the marriage to vent to. I closed my eyes briefly. I didn't know I was giving her permission for something else. Dana continued, and her voice was unsteady now. I didn't understand what I was saying. By the time I figured out what was actually going on between them, you'd already signed the papers, and she'd already moved out. She paused. "I'm sorry, Nash. I was trying to be a supportive sister, and I accidentally handed her a green light." I thought about that for a moment. Dana had always been straight with me, straighter with me than with Lydia, half the time. She wasn't calling to defend her sister. She was calling because she was genuinely carrying this. Dana, I said carefully. You gave her your ear. What she did with it was her choice, not yours. Still, she said, you should have been told sooner. You didn't know sooner, I replied. Not really. Not in a way that would have changed things. She was quiet for a moment. Are you going to be okay? I looked around the kitchen. The fence outside the window was straight and solid. The house smelled faintly of pot roast and linseed oil. Ranger was asleep in front of the back door. Yeah, I said. I'm going to be more than okay. After I hung up, I opened the laptop again. I started pricing flights. The divorce finalized on a cold Tuesday in December, 8 weeks after the initial hearing. The settlement was what Dave had warned me to expect. Not ideal, but survivable. The hidden account was factored into the division, which trimmed Lydia's take somewhat. But Celeste Vaughn had earned her fee. The final split still leaned slightly in Lydia's favor on the liquid assets. The house went to me, with a buyout provision for her equity. The spousal support request was reduced to a limited term, 8 months, on the basis of her demonstrated earning capacity and the concealed account. I signed the final papers at Dave's office. No courthouse this time, just a conference room with decent coffee and a view of the parking garage. Lydia signed at her attorney's office across town. We didn't need to be in the same room for the ending, which was probably appropriate. Dave shook my hand afterward and said, "You handled this well." I thanked him and meant it. I put the house on the market that same week. Not out of bitterness. I'd made that decision calmly, over several weeks. The house was too big for one person and too loaded with the specific weight of a life I was done carrying. I want a clean start, not a museum. It sold in 19 days to a young couple from Houston relocating for work. They walked through it on a Saturday afternoon and made an offer by Monday morning. I took it. I was in Lisbon when I got the notification that the deal had closed. The trip had come together faster than I expected once I'd committed to it. I talked to my regional director, a reasonable man named Greg Carver, and arranged a 4-month leave of absence. My senior crew lead, a solid veteran named Pete Okafor, was more than capable of managing the active sites. Everything that needed to be arranged got arranged, because when a man actually decides to do something instead of just thinking about it, the logistics tend to cooperate. I flew out of Dallas on a Wednesday morning in January. Ranger settled with Doug back in Amarillo. The old man had campaigned hard for the dog, and I didn't argue. My first stop was Tokyo. Tokyo was exactly what I needed it to be. Enormous, efficient, completely indifferent to my personal history. I walked 10 miles the first day, just because I could, ate ramen at a counter where I was the only non-Japanese speaker, and sat in a tiny bar in Shinjuku that evening where a jazz trio played with complete technical precision to an audience of 8 people. Nobody knew my name. Nobody knew about the restaurant, or the papers, or the courthouse, or the hidden account. I was just a middle-aged American in a jacket who tipped well and didn't talk much. I spent 2 weeks in Japan. Kyoto, then Osaka, then back to Tokyo, then Lisbon. White buildings, steep trams, the Atlantic stretching out past the Tagus like a statement of scale. It was in Lisbon, on my 3rd evening, that I met a woman named Vera. She was Portuguese, mid-30s, an architect working on a restoration project in the Alfama district. We ended up at the same small restaurant near the Miradoro de Graca, both eating alone, both clearly comfortable with it. We started talking over shared bread and local wine, and talked for 3 hours about buildings, about work, about what it meant to restore something old versus demolishing it and starting over. She was sharp and genuinely interesting, and had a laugh that surprised you when it happened. We saw each other 3 more times over the following week. Dinner twice, a long walk through Belém, an afternoon at a bookshop where she helped me find a novel in English that she insisted was the best thing published in Portugal in 20 years. On the last evening before I was due to fly to Cape Town, she asked me directly what my situation was. I told her, all of it, in the condensed, honest version a person gives when they've told the story enough times to know which parts matter. She listened without filling the silence. When I finished, she said, "You are somewhere in the middle of something." "Yeah," I admitted. "I think that's right." She nodded slowly. "Then this is a good place to be, in the middle of something. Lisbon has practice with that." She smiled, genuinely, without expectation. "Come back when you are at the other end of it." "I might," I said. We said goodbye outside the restaurant. A handshake that held for a second longer than a handshake usually does. And then she walked up the hill, and I walked down toward my hotel. I didn't feel sad about it. What I felt was clear about where I was, about what I wasn't ready for, about what I was slowly becoming on the far side of everything that had happened. Vera deserved someone who was fully present, not a man still sorting himself out over 3 continents. I flew to Cape Town the next morning. The mountain was visible from the airport as I landed. Enormous, flat-topped, ancient, and unhurried. I stood at the arrival's window and looked at it for a long moment. I had more road ahead than behind me on this trip. That felt exactly right. Back in Midland, per Todd's occasional updates, Lydia and Zach had announced they were together publicly. I got that information the way you get news that no longer has the power to hurt you. As a fact, nothing more. I noted it and moved on. The house had sold. The marriage was finalized. I was standing in a Cape Town airport looking at a mountain. Whatever came next, it was entirely mine to build. Southeast Asia hit differently than Europe. Lisbon had been beautiful and melancholy in equal measure, the kind of city that makes you feel your losses in an almost literary way. Cape Town had given me scale, but Bangkok was alive in a way that demanded your full attention and didn't apologize for it. Traffic and heat and color and the smell of street food at every corner. Tuk-tuks threading gaps that shouldn't fit them. Temples rising gold and unhurried above the noise. You couldn't be passive there. The city required presence. I needed that. I spent 4 days in Bangkok, then took a train north to Chiang Mai, where the pace dropped and the air cooled and the mornings were quiet enough to think in. I found a small guest house near the old city walls run by a family who left coffee and fruit outside the door each morning without being asked. I settled into a routine: early walk, coffee, writing for an hour, then the day open and unscheduled. It was in Chiang Mai, in the middle of my second week there, that Todd's message came through. Heads up, Lydia and Zach are done. Heard from Phil. Apparently it fell apart fast. She's staying with Dana for now. I read it twice, sitting on the steps outside my guest house while a temple bell rang somewhere in the distance. I waited to feel something significant: satisfaction, vindication, maybe a residual sting. What I actually felt was very close to nothing. Not emptiness, just the clean neutrality of something that had stopped having a claim on me. I typed back, "Appreciate the update. How's the family?" Todd replied with a paragraph about his daughter's soccer season. That was the right proportion. That was exactly the right proportion. I thought about Lydia that evening over dinner. The good version of her. The one from the early years. The one who'd smiled with her whole face at that 4th of July cookout in Midland. That version had been real. I hadn't invented it. Whatever had eroded it, restlessness, boredom, the particular hunger some people carry that no single person can ever fully feed, that had been real too, just not something I'd been equipped to fix. She'd made her choices. Zach had made his. And now they were sitting somewhere in the wreckage of those choices. And I was in northern Thailand listening to temple bells. I didn't feel superior. I just felt free. The following week, Dave Pratt sent the final financial confirmation. The house had fully transferred. The accounts were settled. The limited support payments were structured and automatic. Everything was clean. Everything was done. I was in a cafe in the old city when I read the email. I ordered another coffee, finished the chapter I'd been writing in my journal, and went for a long walk along the moat that circled the ancient walls. 11 years, reduced to a series of clean, finalized documents. There was something both brutal and merciful about that. That night I called Doug. "How's the dog?" I asked first. "Fat and happy," my father said. "I've been giving him Carol's table scraps." "Don't tell me not to." "I won't." A pause. "How are you?" "I think I'm actually good," I said. And I meant it in a way I hadn't fully meant it before. Not performing good. Actually good. Doug was quiet for a moment in the way he got when something mattered to him. "When are you coming home?" 2 more weeks. "I want to go through Bali before I head back." "Bali?" He said it like I'd named a planet. "What's in Bali?" "I don't know yet," I said. "That's the point." He made a sound that was as close to a laugh as Doug Kemper ever got. "Fair enough. I'll keep the dog fat until you get back." I'd expect nothing less. 2 weeks later I flew home. Dallas first, then connecting to Midland. The flight was long, and I slept most of it, waking up somewhere over the Pacific with the kind of clear-headed calm that only comes from actual rest and actual distance. Coming back to the house felt different than I'd expected. It was still mine, The fence Doug and I had fixed standing straight in the winter light. Ranger going absolutely sideways when I walked through the door, the Dutch oven still on the bottom cabinet left of the stove. But the weight that had lived in the walls was gone. Not because anything had been resolved dramatically, just because enough time had passed and enough miles had accumulated that the walls were simply walls again. The first week back, I had dinner with Todd and his wife. Normal evening, good food, real laughter for the first time in a while. On the drive home, I thought about the round-the-world itinerary I'd sketched out and then actually completed, the cities I'd walked through alone, the bench in Lisbon where Vera and I talked about buildings, the Chiang Mai morning when Todd's message arrived, and I'd felt nothing where pain used to live. The second week back, I drove up to Amarillo to collect Ranger from Doug. The old man had clearly gotten attached. He handed the dog over with the resigned expression of a man surrendering something under protest. You could visit more, I told him. I could, he agreed. I might. We ate dinner at Carol's table. Pot roast again, which I was beginning to think was the Kemper family response to every significant life event, and I told them about the trip in pieces, the parts worth telling. Tokyo's scale, Lisbon's light, the Cape Town mountain, the Chiang Mai mornings. Doug listened and asked 2 questions, which for him was high engagement. Driving back to Midland with Ranger asleep across the back seat, I thought about what came next. The job was waiting. Pete Okafor had managed everything cleanly, and I'd be stepping back into a functional operation, not a mess. The new equipment certification I'd been putting off for a year was now going to happen. In the spring, maybe I wanted to look at a small plot of land east of Midland where a friend had mentioned building might be possible. New plans. Real ones, not deferred ones. I wasn't in a hurry to find anyone. I knew that about myself now, with a clarity that hadn't been there before the trip. Vera had been right. I'd been in the middle of something. I was at the other end of it now, or close enough to see the other end clearly. When the right time came, it would come. I wasn't going to manufacture it. The road back to Midland was long and straight, and lit by a sky full of stars that didn't care about any of this. They used to feel lonely. Now it just felt like the size of things. 3 months after I came home, I bought a piece of land. 12 acres east of Midland, mostly flat with a ridge line along the northern edge that caught the morning light in a way that stopped me cold the first time I walked it. The soil was good. The elevation was enough to matter. And there was room, real room, to build something from scratch without working around what someone else had left behind. I wasn't ready to build a house yet, but I bought the land because knowing it was there changed how I oriented toward the future. Like a compass finding north after spinning loose for too long. Dave Pratt called me on a Tuesday in March. Not about the divorce. That was fully settled. But because he'd heard something through the professional network and thought I should know. Lydia's situation has changed, he said, with the careful neutrality of a man delivering information without editorializing. The support payments. She's been trying to access the structured account early. Her attorney filed a modification request last week. What's her basis? I asked. Change of circumstances. Apparently the position at the clinic ended, and from what I understand, there are some personal financial pressures as well. He paused. I'm only telling you this, so you're not caught off guard if you receive a filing. The modification request is almost certainly going to be denied. The original order was explicit about the term and conditions. But you should be aware. I thanked him, ended the call, and sat for a moment. The clinic position was gone. The Zach situation was already finished according to Todd. Whatever financial cushion she'd imagined from the settlement had apparently not stretched as far as planned. The hidden account, once divided as a marital asset, had been worth considerably less to her than if she'd simply disclosed it from the start. The legal fees from Celeste Vaughn's billing had eaten further into her share. The 60-40 split she'd maneuvered for had landed somewhere well south of what she'd originally drawn up in those careful, deliberate papers. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. What I felt was the quiet, impersonal recognition of a pattern completing itself. She played a long, calculated game. The calculation had been wrong on multiple levels, and wrong calculations have consequences that don't ask for your opinion. I put the phone down and went outside to look at the equipment specs I'd been reviewing for the new Permian Basin project starting in April. The sun was warm for March. Ranger was working his way along the back fence, nose to the ground, investigating something of enormous personal importance to him. I watched him for a minute and thought, that's about right. You find the things that matter to you, and you work them with everything you've got, and you don't look up every 5 minutes to see who's watching. Spring came in steadily. The Permian project launched on schedule. Pete Okafor and I worked well together. Better than before, actually, because I came back from the trip with something that might have been perspective, or maybe just a lower tolerance for things that didn't deserve my energy. Todd came out to the land with me one Saturday in April. We walked the ridge line in the late afternoon, the West Texas sky doing its particular thing with light and distance. He didn't say much. Neither did I. At the northern end of the ridge, we stopped and looked out at the flat expanse below, the oil field equipment visible in the middle distance, the road back to Midland a thin line through the scrub. "You going to build out here?" he asked. "Eventually," I said. "When it's time." He nodded. "It's good land." "Yeah," I agreed. "It is." We drove back in the early dark, Ranger in the truck bed, the radio on low. I wasn't the same man who'd signed those papers at the kitchen table 16 months ago. Not worse, not better in any way that required announcing. Just different in the way that men get different when they stop carrying things they should have set down a long time ago. I had land. I had good work. I had a dog who leaned against my leg during meals, and a father who drove 4 hours without being asked, and a friend who walked ridgelines in silence, and knew that was enough. I had myself back. Turned out that was the most important thing I'd lost, and the most important thing I'd found. The night I drove back from the land that Saturday, I stopped at the old roadside diner on the highway, the kind of place that's been there since before the interstate, chrome counter and bad lighting and coffee that's been sitting since noon. I sat at the counter and ordered a burger and ate it alone, and it was one of the better meals I'd had in a while. Not because of the food, because I was hungry, and I was fed, and I was home.